All right, and welcome to this very special DiceCasters. It is called Solo Play because, well, we're just going to be giving our own little individual stories for this next couple weeks. Just talking about, a personal story, one that's for either their character or their favorite kind of GM moment, whatever they kind of want to talk about. But for me, I'm going to talk about kind of this idea of really small group play. And what'll end up happening is that sometimes you'll end up with a DM needing to make a character, and how that will kind of awkwardly work sometimes, because then you actually have a player that should know what to do next. And how do you play that character in a way that doesn't interfere with the overall story? How do you make a character that isn't distracting overall to the rest of the group? Knowing, because metagame, they know that there's a person there who has information. But how do you also do that to where you as a DM and a player can still have fun and engage with the story that you're telling? And the way, in this particular instance, I went about doing it was we were doing a co-DM story where I had made the overarching plot of these hunters that were being contracted out to kind of brave the wilds and find ways to secure a border for this town called the Sanctuary. And what they were doing with they'd be sent out to go fight orcs, or they'd go out to fight giants and stuff. And I introduced a character that was kind of the right hand of the character or of the person that was leading the entire operation, and his name was Nodley. And he was a callback to an earlier campaign that's set within the same world, where another character of mine had rescued, he was a warforged named Exia, and he had rescued an entire warehouse full of warforged and kind of set them free to, live the life they wanted to live. And Nodley is one of those warforged, and he'd end up on this place called Tachanka, which, if you play the Mass Effect games, it's very similar to that, where it's a very wild and wasteland kind of land. Excuse me. So what we would end up doing was Nodley would be a kind of companion as like a guide, or he would be somebody there to keep an eye on something. But how I was using him was he was my character when I was not DMing. And any other time he would find a reason to not be there, to kind of turn back into an NPC for the time being. And the kind of way I was playing it was that when he was with the group, he was with the group. He had secrets, but he was always helpful and trying to solve whatever issues came up with fighting giants or fighting orcs, what have you. But then as soon as I would turn back control into my character or into my DM session, he would kind of turn back into that right hand of this kind of charismatic town leader character and all the stuff he would do. And the idea of Nodley was that he was a guy that was told that by somebody, you can do whatever you want, and he was inspired by that. So he, hopped a boat, went to this wild land, and decided that he was going to do what he knew as a warforged, and he was going to aid his services in fighting, basically. So he kind of joined the town militia, did kind of, odd jobs like that, until the end of the world happened. Yeah, that was also something that the previous campaign, the one that Exia was in, caused inadvertently. But basically, it was an entire day of nothing but like complete and total war across the entire globe. And one of the things that ended up happening was some of the town leaders were being assaulted by like pit fiends and all kinds of demonic and devilish sorts of monsters. And Nodle was there trying to defend the best he could, and like ended up saving like a high-ranking official. And for that, they made sure and like took care of him, and his body was like really wrecked from this experience. But they were able to try to repair him. But in the fallout of this war, there was a decree by all the gods to basically put a temporary hold on all magic, to try to at least somewhat even the playing field from all these Baelor and other demons and all their innate magical properties. So the way they had to end up repairing Nodle was to give him the Warforged body perk or feat. This is 3-5, by the way. So that's how they ended up being able to put him back together, and for me to kind of more and more shape the kind of character he was going to end up being. So then we kind of jump ahead to the to when the group meets him. I was kind of, as a DM, keeping him kind of in shadow. They knew he was like the guy's right hand, but they didn't know exactly who or what he was, because he was always a cloaked figure until there was finally the moment where he says, all right, well, on this next adventure, I think you're going to need backup, and here's Nodle, and it's revealed he's Warforged. And it's probably one of the very few Warforged that are left after, the entire experience of having them be kind of turncoats and all kinds of other stuff, all story elements that happened in the last game. And so Nodle would go out and he would fight, and how he fought was he would use a chain whip with and he would use his psionic abilities, and I kind of said that they were more like innate abilities that he kind of didn't necessarily train to have. They were just kind of inside of him because of how he was reforged and how he was trained a little bit by Exia, who was a scout. So he had stealth and scouting properties, and he had the skirmish class ability, and he was an illocator, so he was always floating, and he could just pop in and out, and he was very good at movement. That was kind of his thing, is that he could bop in, smack somebody, bop out. And I also wanted to keep fleshing out the character aspects of him. So what he would, I gave him a flaw called Murky-Eyed, which I basically turned that into he only has one eye, because they weren't able to get him an eye back. So anyhow, that's kind of how he was a locator, he was a scout. He was kind of supposed to be the party's eyes and ears, help him look out for things that they wouldn't be able to see maybe otherwise. And whenever it would come back to me DMing, he would kind of go away and become more of an NPC. But if the players ever wanted to go contact and talk to him, he was still available, and I would still play him as if he were a player character. If they had questions, comments, concerns, he would be able to address those in kind of a more official capacity. So if they had like, what's this rule about like about the city, or could we get the town guard to do this, because he actually has like a high rank within the town. Everybody holds him in high revere because of what he did during that day of war. So he had all these perks that I kind of gave to him, but I also made it very apparent that Nodle wasn't necessarily the talking type. He wasn't the guy who's going to boast and use his abilities and use his class and his rank for personal gain. And he wouldn't like throw it in the player's face. He also didn't take any money because he was set from being with the for being a member of the higher echelon of the town. But how it kind of turns out was that the higher echelon of the town was a mind flayer sect who calls themselves the Master, because they are all one. Not like they are a hive mind, but they are all literally the same person who has copied his brain into a whole bunch of other people. So they all have the exact same thoughts, ideas, and emotions about everything. And if you kind of don't agree with him, he will either find a way to make it so that you do agree with him, or he will make you agree with him. Nodley was not one of the people that he had to do much fiddling with. He saved Nodley's life because he was the guy that Nodley saved. And he saw that, and Nodley saw in the Master a person who was willing and able to do whatever it took to save the city, even if it was kind of underhanded means. When you have demons and stuff flying about like it's no problem, he kind of saw somebody who was, who would use mind trickery as the lesser of the evils. And it was kind of a cool and unique thing that I got to do was I got the players to really kind of trust and rely on Nodley, while not at all trusting Gideon, who was the master kind of in disguise, or one of the masters. Because they never really truly kind of got on board with him, but they trusted Nodley. Even when the shoe fell, and they found out that, like, who Gideon was, and found out about all the masters running around and how they're kind of pulling the strings and possibly doing some not very good things, and the fact that there's mind flayers within their ranks. They didn't trust the master, but they trusted Nodley, who trusted the master. So it was a very kind of unique thing that I think you only kind of can do when you're in this situation. I suppose you could do it if you were just a DM and you had an NPC that the players really liked. But the fact that I also was playing and I was in the shit with them, Nodley was a guy that they played alongside with, it also helped to like transition. And it made the players and the characters trust Nodley kind of organically, instead of anybody having to say like, well, I guess my guy would trust him. It was like, no, like, Nodley's had his head crushed trying to save us. Like, we should really give him the benefit of the doubt here. So, yeah, that would be my advice. If that's ever a situation you have to be into, maybe you have like only 3 or 4 people and you think you need an extra hand within the game. You always have that thing I've seen where it's like you have the extra guy, but all he ever does is he'll throw out a healing spell, maybe he'll throw out a buff, or he'll swing an axe and miss. And sometimes you just completely forget that he's even there, except for when he has to walk him and go, oh, the path is this way. When you can really try to find their niche and have them fit as a part of the group, it can really not only help with the metagame of getting things moving along, it can really help the story of having an outsider that the players can really invest themselves into. So that would be what I'm going to say. Maybe we'll hear what other people are going to say next time.